couple of people are getting one of those last-minute snacks here. All right, let's get started this morning. Let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, as we gather for this sixth and final week of this study, every one of us in this room has been through some trials and tribulations. Every one of us has experienced some pain and suffering. That not only has been difficult for us, but it is also a gift that enables us to understand other people who are experiencing the same thing. So as we go forth from this study, may each of us feel qualified to enter into the pain and suffering of those around us. May we go in not trying to fix, but to listen, to care, to open our heart to their heart, and in that way to support them and bring them closer to our Lord. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we've been looking at the 7 words from the cross, and we've looked at the reconciliation. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And we ended last time with the where Jesus was taking care of his mother. And so we were looking at it from the standpoint of what do the dying need to do to take care of their loved ones. But the other thing I didn't mention then, I wanted to mention today, is that this also works from the other side. That this is a time for the family to also bless their loved one who is passing. I think a lot of times when people come to their end, they are looking at their life and they are kind of saying to themselves, it didn't really amount to much. I didn't really do that much. So to have your children kind of come to the bedside and say, Mom, you were the best. You taught me so much. You were always there. You never let me get by with stuff. You disciplined me. And so to get that affirmation from your family and from your loved ones, that's a really, really powerful thing. So kind of keep that in mind too, that when you're sitting around that bedside, tell that person what you have observed them doing, what it is that they taught you, what it is that they showed you. Any other questions or comments on that particular subject? Mm-hmm.
I would just add do the same thing whether or not.
Yes. Right. And I was kind of going to get to that eventually, that all of these things we're talking about do not have to be saved until someone's on their last hours. We really should be doing this all along the way. And I think many of us who maybe have the German culture where, we're not supposed to praise, we're not supposed to thank, we need to get over that. So we need to be more verbal. And I've actually adopted that practice of writing a letter to my children. And this is every Christmas, each one gets a letter. So that's where I do my affirmation and my thanking. When my kids were little, I don't think they, thought too much about the letter. But now I think they're looking at it a little more seriously. Matt, you had your hand up.
I always, talking about you should say that throughout your life, I never failed to tell my parents that, my mom especially, how much and the last time I had talked to her was 2 days before, because she passed away very unexpectedly, and I had told her, I said, Mom, you've always been the best, you've been a wonderful, and not knowing that 2 days later she was gonna go, so I was glad I did.
For practicing that with your parents. And again, as she went on her journey, she's probably carrying that with her. Matt loved me. Matt thought I was a good mom. And so that kind of puts a little wind in your sails, I think, when you are, taking that ship to the next harbor. Anybody else? All right, so today we want to pick it up then with where Jesus speaks to the thief who is hanging on the cross next to him. So the thief says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. What I want to look at with you there is how Jesus is so helpless. He's nailed on this cross. There's really nothing that he can do. So when he was physically active, he was walking around, he was going village to village, he was touching the lives of lots of people. Now he's in a situation where he's very limited in what he can do. But limited does not mean helpless. And I think it's an important distinction to make because I run into a lot of people who, as they're in the dying process, have lost all of their strength. And so they feel like there's nothing more that they can do. So what power does Jesus have, even though he's quite limited in his abilities? What power does he still have left?
To forgive. Ability to forgive.
Yes. Okay. So I think, too, what's important here, he still has his voice. And he uses that voice to bring a word of comfort to this thief. Because remember what the thief says. He says, remember me. Why doesn't he say, bring me into your kingdom? Why does he say, remember me?
Because he knows he's not worthy.
Yeah, he knows he's not worthy. So I think most of us are aware of our unworthiness. This guy is double, triple aware because the reason he's being executed is that he has committed capital crimes. So he's a murderer. He's who knows what else that he has done. So he has done terrible, violent things to many people in his life. And he makes that comment, we deserve this. This is not a fluke of justice that we are being executed here. We are criminals, and this is what happens to criminals. So we're getting what we deserve. So he says, I'm not worthy. I know there's no chance that I could ever get into your kingdom. So all I can hope for is that you will remember me. And isn't that poignant? You just remember me. And Jesus is obviously touched by that. And Jesus also sees that this man has now recognized that he needs forgiveness. He needs peace. And so Jesus says, that I can give you. That's why I came. That's why I'm here. And so you get to be one of those people who will inherit because of what I'm doing here. So it's a very beautiful thing, isn't it? To be in that situation where he has limited power and yet uses that power to its full extent. So as we are working with people who are in a state of limited strength, the question again becomes, what power do they still have? My mother really was an example of that. She was in hospice, and she kind of had gone into hospice before she was really ready to leave her home. So there were some loose ends, and there were some things that needed taken care of. So as my two sisters were there visiting her in hospice, she said, I want to go back to my home one more time. And so they talked to the staff, and they were like, well, okay, you're responsible for her. And so it was about a 20-mile drive from the hospice to where Mom's home was. So they took her. And this was in, I would say, March. So you could tell that spring was kind of thinking about making an appearance. So as Mom gets out of the car, she's looking around, and she's got all these flowers. So she said, the roses need watering. Okay, now she knows she can't do this. So she is using what limited power she has to give directions. And so they get the hose out, they water the roses. Then they get in the house, and she had been in clubs and things, so she had all these notes and records. So she's directing my sisters again, who is supposed to get what. And then she said, I bet, Pam, you would like to make some rolls. Cinnamon rolls was one of my mom's specialties. And by that time, my sisters are tired, and Pam is like, no, the last thing I want to do is make rolls. But the power of Mom's words, you didn't say no to her. So she gets out the flour, and she starts putting stuff together. And Mom was supervising, and she said, too much flour. And so these had to be Mom's rolls the way she made them, even if she couldn't use her hands. So they got in the oven, and before the timer went off, Mom said they're done. She could smell. And they took them out, and she said, okay, now you take some of these rolls to Naomi next door, the neighbor. You put the rest in the freezer, and then you'll have those when I'm gone. Now there's the power that she had, that still had that strength to say, this is kind of my act of love. On the morning of my funeral, my family are going to eat my rolls, and they're going to say, we love this lady. Not that I needed the rolls. And I couldn't eat my rolls because I just didn't have the stomach for it on the morning of her funeral. My sons had no problem. They ate mine as well as their own. But just think about, again, what we can say to people who are in a state of weakness, but who still have the power to speak. And so again, what could they say? So I think if you're a grandma and you have grandchildren, and maybe these grandchildren are kind of struggling to figure themselves out, imagine that you would have a little speech for that grandchild. And that speech is going to be very powerful, because that grandchild is very aware that this is coming from your heart. This is coming with all of the impact that you can put into that. So I don't think we are ever more powerful than when we are at our last moments and we are still conscious and we are still able to tell people things that we think they need to know and things that we think are important. And perhaps sometimes parents will have some words for their children who, again, may be having squabbles with each other. And they were kind of like, you're from this family, you're all our children, and I am praying that you can find a way to overcome your differences and not let some of this petty bickering, get in the way and separate you. Because we all know stories of siblings that divided at the time of their parents' passing and have not spoken to each other since. And I saw, plenty of that in my parish. And a lot of it revolved around the estate and who got what. And, again, all of that kind of stuff. If you can avoid that. So the dying has some ability to help with that. Anything else that anybody wants to contribute on that issue of being weak but not being helpless? Okay. Then the John 19:28, I thirst. Now we typically look at that as it's a physical thirst because he is terribly dehydrated from the effects of the scourging and the crucifixion and the exposure to the elements. And then we also look at it as a fulfillment of Scripture that this is spoken of in the Psalms. But I got another perspective on that from listening to dying patients. And Sue, I think, had talked about this in reference to elderly people who, even if they're in their 90s, they still see how precious life is. And so they thirst for more. So that is the angle that I want to talk about here. That idea that as life is ending, life never looks more precious. When you realize that time is limited and that you have very little time left, then everything that you look at and everything that you cherish becomes all the more precious to you. So as Jesus is saying that, he is also saying, I thirst to have another day with my 12. I thirst to have another moment with my mother. I thirst to see another sunrise, another sunset. Just all of the things that are around that people take for granted. And there was a cancer patient that kind of brought that home to me because she was talking about going up north and sitting in her cabin, and she was watching this bird building a nest. She was a very busy lady all her life, worked hard, didn't have time to watch the birds. But there again, in her dying, she saw that, and she was just like, that was the most incredible thing. For hours, she watched that bird flying back and forth, bringing more material to construct that nest that it was making. And that was where her I thirst was really becoming clear there. So again, keep that in mind when you are in the presence of someone who is nearing the end of their life. Help them to stay included. Don't put them in the back room. Don't pull the shades, and again, where they're just kind of isolated. But make them front and center if in every way possible. So if you can put that bed in the living room where everybody is going by, where the window is open, where they can see the birds out there, and they can see the traffic going by, that would be a wonderful thing. And dying people still want to know what's going on, don't they? So if the grandchild comes in and they had this exciting basketball game and they scored the winning basket, you better believe Grandma wants to hear every detail of that. Did you shoot right-handed or left-handed? How did you make that? Did you juke the guy? She wants to know every detail about that. So keep that in mind, how the dying thirst to live as long as they can. They want to take in every blessing that God has for them that is out there. Any other thoughts that anybody has on that subject? Yeah.
Summer I read a book about grief. It wasn't a very good book, but there were things that I took from it. And hearing is the last to go, it said in the book. And I thought that was very very interesting and comforting, because when I sat with my dad at hospice on the last day, he didn't talk anymore. He had lung cancer and COPD, and that disease had taken over, and he was on morphine. And being able to tell him, you know, to thank him for giving me a good life and to go home with Jesus was, well, one, he couldn't say anything back, which was also good. And but it was also that I knew he heard it. Right, he didn't have anything to say, but I knew I could, just even reading that was a comfort of knowing that he heard what I was saying, even though he didn't give me a whole lot back.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I think, too, that I've heard that many times also, that the gift of hearing may be the last sense that we lose. And you hear stories about people who heard what the doctors were saying in their surgery because the anesthetic wasn't quite heavy enough and it wasn't flattering. And so, yeah, be careful what you say when you assume that people aren't hearing, because they are. And I think it's beautiful, isn't it, that you can, knowing that, you can put in all those words of love and those words of blessing. And if your father was one of those who didn't like compliments, was that kind of, you know, so many people are, oh, you know, you're just saying that, oh, pshaw, don't, you know, and they try to shut you down. But that would be a place where they can take it in. And that's going to aid them, I think, in their journey. Marlene.
Remember Virginia Ruck when she was a member here. She was a good friend of mine. And I had the opportunity to be by her bedside when she was dying. And Pastor Meyer was called, and he came. She was not responding to anybody at the time, but looking peaceful. And he stood next to her bed, and it struck me that he put his mouth right next to her ear. You couldn't hear a word that he said, but he stood there and talked to her, I bet, for almost 10 minutes. And it was just such an interesting way to think of ministering to somebody. And she, I can't say that her expression changed at all, but putting that together with Stephanie's comments and yours, I think it was excellent representation of giving comfort.
Thank you, Marlene, for that example, because I think, too, you know, pastoral care, what is that? And so as pastors go into those situations, a lot of times, you know, the general outline we have is, okay, you read something from the Bible and you have a prayer. And but I think he really personalized that. And I think by him speaking into her ear, he was also saying, Ginny, you and I have known each other for a long time. And I always kind of had that in my mind, too, when I was ministering to people that I had known for a long time. We had a track record. We had history together. And so to be able to, you know, bring that in there, too. We have walked together. And now you are going on. I've gone as far as I can with you, but I send you on with God's blessing. Mary, you had your hand.
You were the pastor for our nephew Mark, who was dying of pancreatic cancer. And I don't know if it was your inspiration that he wanted to go to a place in his youth that he loved so much, but he was in no shape to go. I think you inspired him to go for it. So his brother took him up to our family cottage near Watama, and he died there, not in the cottage, but that was his last place. And he knew where he was going, but he just, I think he wanted to thank God for all the summers and time he spent there, and it's a blessed thing. So, and thank you for taking such good care of him.
Yeah, I think, too, you know, Mark did have a lot of attachments, and that cottage had all that history. You know, your father, and was it his father also, had built that cabin, and So, years and years of family get-togethers. And Mark had been a part of that, and that was precious to him. And so to him, that would be kind of his stepping off point, as it were. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? So that I thirst, it has a lot of meaning to it. Now, Matthew 27. This one is, my God, why have you forsaken me? It just hits me in the heart every time I hear those words. Because there's so much emotion in those words. And depending upon what emotion you want to attach to it, you can say those words in many different ways. So it can be kind of an expression of anger. My God, why have you forsaken me? Me of all people. It can be, again, the idea of pain. Why have you forsaken me? I am so bereft. I am so lonely. So I use the word isolation, that when we come to those moments of great darkness, and for Jesus, the sun did not shine for 3 hours, and there was just nothing for him at that point. Then we begin to understand the depth of the darkness and the suffering that he was in at that point. So when we are with people, I think every person at some point in their death journey is going to experience that moment of abandonment, that moment of darkness. It reminds me of my brother. He died in 21, 5 years ago, the 1st of July. And we had called him about the middle of June in 21. We wanted to come up to see him. And he was doing chemo at that point, and he really didn't want us to come until he was finished with that. So he had gone in for a chemo appointment, and he couldn't get out of the car. He had lost all of the feeling in his legs, and all of a sudden, he was paralyzed from the waist down. The hospital was right across the street, so they admitted him to the hospital. And so when I found out about it and called him, he was like, "Don't come. I don't want you to come until I get out of the hospital." And, Jean and I, in working with cancer patients like we do, we just had that very strong feeling that things were really taking a turning point here. So I decided to ignore my brother's words and say, "We're going." And so we drove up to St. Paul, Minnesota, where he was in the hospital. And we came into the room, and now he's paralyzed. And there were a couple of different teams of doctors that came in that day, and they couldn't make up their mind how to address the paralysis. So some of them were thinking we should do radiation to shrink the tumor, to take the pressure off the spine. Others were thinking, maybe it's an infection, and so they were just kind of twiddling and dwaddling around. And, Jean and I both knew that that window of radiation to relieve the pressure is very, very fine. So you got like 24 hours. And if you don't do it, then the paralysis is not going to go away. We knew that this was not a good thing. So I think in the course of all of that, my brother really began to think to himself, this is it. I am not going to get through this. So I think it really hit him. And he's lying there in his bed, and he starts beating on his legs with his hands, hoping that he can restore some feeling to those legs. And he said, "I want to live. I want to live." And Jean and I stepped to the bedside, and I put my hand on his head, and she held his hand, and we all cried. Because not only was he facing the fact that his life was coming to an end, we were facing that we were going to lose this person who was so precious to us. And so there we were in that moment. My God, why have you forsaken me? And that was what we were doing in that moment. So I want to emphasize to you that, so often we're thinking, okay, well, what do I say? What do I do? How can I fix this? How can I make this better? And it's just important to say some things cannot be fixed. But that does not mean that you walk out the door. That does not mean that you say, oh my goodness, look at the time. Gee, I just got a phone call. That is where you stay. That is where you don't leave. And that's what Gene and I did in that moment. Later on that evening, we were with his fiancée, Linda, and Scott called her, and he said, I want to go into hospice. So another doctor had come, and Scott had said, okay, this is what I need to do. This is where I want to go with the days that remain to me. So the next day, I had one more opportunity to say goodbye to him. And Gene couldn't go in because of COVID restrictions and limited visitors. But the only thing I could think of that I wanted to do was to sing to him, God be with you till we meet again. And so I sang that to him. And that was my last conversation with my brother. So he spent 2 weeks in hospice. My younger son, Jeff, who loved Scott like a father, sat at his bedside in his last moments and kept the vigil with him. And I'll be eternally grateful to my son for doing that. But again, what thoughts come to your mind as you think about those really, really difficult moments where there is nothing more that can be said, but we still need to be there? How hard is it to go in there? It's very hard, isn't it? It takes courage. But I want to encourage each and every one of you that if you can do that, the blessings that you will receive from having done that, from knowing. Because when we think about this moment where Jesus felt God forsaken, he did that so we would never feel forsaken. So we, in our darkest moment, we are still not God forsaken because of what Jesus did. But to make that real for people, we have to be there. We have to bring that message. God has not abandoned you because he sent me. He sent me to sit here, no matter how long it takes, and I'm with you until you make that passage. Any other thoughts that anybody has about the difficulty of entering into those moments of intense suffering?
I think the way we as the bereaved handle ourselves at that point in the hospital is such a testimony to the people around us, whether it's the nurses and the doctors or family and friends that come in. That we may not even have to say anything, it's just the way we care for and love the person entering heaven, but just be a testimony without talking at that point.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Yvonne, that our presence is a testimony to all of the people around them. And I really kind of see that at Freighter too, that the nurses have done everything they can do, and they're feeling helpless now. Because again, nurses are there to fix. They are there to get you well and get you out. So when they get into that situation where they can no longer do anything that will provide that, they really are switching roles into caring for them, and some of them do that very well. But still, they are watching. They are watching what the chaplain does. And so if they see the chaplain, again, listening and supporting, not necessarily using a lot of words, they will say to themselves, okay, that, I think, that is what I want to do too. So you are making that testimony. Doctors are an interesting breed because they tend to kind of disappear at the end when they know that they can no longer. And I remember one of our doctors would, when his patients were beyond treatment, he would say, get them in hospice. And some of his patients were very hurt because they had a relationship with him, and now he just disappeared. And so they had no opportunity to thank him for what he had done and to have that kind of goodbye. But again, they just don't want to be there. And I'm assuming part of it is because it's so painful, because they did care about the people that were under their supervision. So their way of handling that was to just disappear. And you see many people doing that. And I see lots of family doing that because they will say to me, I just can't. I can't go in there. And I'm like, okay, I wish you could, but I can't make you. And if you could, you may find out that will be a great blessing to you. But not everybody is able to do that. So everybody is watching, aren't they? Everything that we do. Any other thoughts or comments? Matt?
Question, do you ever get any people, family members that express regret that they, after a person has passed away, that they didn't go in?
Yeah. I think I've had those conversations also, that later on they were sorry and they wish they would have and wish they could have. Now that kind of has the feeling of, well, too bad, you know, that opportunity was lost. Can we bring redemption into that conversation also? Can we find any hope for that person? I think we can. And one thing I will say to people is, well, what did you want to say? What did you want to give to that person? I'd like you to tell that to me. And while you are telling that to me, you are also telling it to God. And now, again, God is the God of the dead and the living. And so as Jesus points out in the Lazarus story, you know, God is on both sides. So he's got those folks over there and he's got us over here. And so in a way, he's a bridge also, isn't he? What we tell to God, then God can also tell to that person. So I kind of have that image in my mind that even when opportunities are lost, redemption is still possible. And those can be very, again, healing conversations for people. So if you have someone who has that level of trust in you that they will share that kind of pain, you know, you don't want to stomp on them and say, well, too bad. But you want to say to them, yeah, there still is something we can do with that. Any other? Sue, you had your hand up too.
I was just going to say that, you know, even when it's closer to the end, there are patients that I've had, they can be extremely old, and they're angry that this is happening right now. And it's a loss of control. You know, it's not like they have a problem with death, but it's happening not of their choosing. They again, they want to be in control of when they die. And so they express a lot of anger that this is happening to them now.
And so sometimes I think we will say it's not good to be angry. But again, to understand the reason they're angry is because they're not in charge of this situation. That's one of life's greatest delusions, is that we have control. We live most of our lives thinking that we have control over things. And we get all these reminders that we have very little control. And then at the end, it is just so obvious, isn't it? Yeah, this is not your show here. So again, I think for them to be able to express that anger to you, and you're there to listen and to care for them, maybe they start to get that revelation like, I never really was in control. And now God is calling me. And as much as I hate to leave this, he's probably got something better for me. Was there a hand over here? Yeah.
Just two quick things. I think it's, if you ever have the opportunity to be with someone when they die, I think it's not nearly as hard as you would expect. I have held the hands of 4 of my friends, and plus Mike. And you, I think, are overcome by the peace of the moment sometimes, if you look for that, rather than the anxiety or the sadness or the sorrow. And especially if it's someone who is a Christian. That person you know is going home to the Lord. It's almost like cheering them on.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we've been talking, and you've done a very good job of guiding this conversation on preparing. An example that I heard from the news this morning, I don't know if anybody else heard it. Senator Lindsey Graham died last night.
Did he?
Came home from a trip to Europe with negotiations, called the president, went home, and died. He probably had lots of things that he wanted to do yet. He was only 71. And that happens in our lives and in many lives of people that we know. So preparing is good, but it's kind of a lifelong process of thinking about it. I think is beneficial.
Yeah, you don't want to put that idea of preparing last on your list of things to do.
At the end, it's what you do as you think.
So thank you, Marlene. And I think, too, you have found courage in the fact that you've done it numerous times. And the more that you do it, the more you are comfortable in that environment. So I think the first time is always the most difficult time for all of us. And we feel that feeling of it's happening too quickly, we don't know what to do, we are kind of grasping at straws. I find too, as chaplains, we get called to the bedside of a lot of patients at their death, and then the family requests a chaplain to come. And what I observe is that the families are like, well, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to handle this? And they have all these memories and all these feelings, and again, you don't know what's all going on in that family. Did they really love this person, or was there animosity? Were there broken? You just have no idea what's there. So I just found in inviting people to share memories of, well, tell me about your dad, because I never knew him, and what did you love about him? And then they get going, and then that becomes part of them entering into the grieving and the healing process. So I think, we all need to be thinking about that too. Who are all these people around us? Where are they at? What was their connection? And let's see if we can open some of that up and get conversation going with that also. Anything else? Really good comments from all of you. Thanks so much for your sharing your experiences too and your perspectives. So then it is finished, John 19. It is finished. Wouldn't we all love to say that? So, again, my mother tried with watering the roses and making the rolls. But in spite of that, and as careful as she was to give instructions, there still were loose ends. There still were things that had not been taken care of. And when I had my near-death experience, I realized that Jean didn't know the password to the bank account and a few other important bits of information. So often our life ends and there are all kinds of loose ends. So Jesus could say it's finished. He had completed his task. But the rest of us, we're going to have loose ends, aren't we? So I think what we want to focus on there is that we finished what was important. And so with Jesus also, I think the important thing was when he was baptized, God said, "You are my beloved, you are my son." And at the transfiguration, said the same thing. So, that was and the important thing is, I was your son. I fulfilled my calling. I carried out my task. So we want to look at ourselves in that same light, that we are God's child. And each one of us, the unique child of God that we are, we have situations that we are in. We have gifts that God has given us. So no matter what the length of our life might be, the hope is that we lived our potential, that we used our gifts as much as we could, and that we touched as many people as we could. And having done that, if again, we've got papers scattered everywhere, and people are going to be yelling at us long after we're gone because they can't find what they need, we'll take a pass on that one. But did we carry out our calling? And I like the parable that Jesus told where he had his servants and he gave each one a certain amount of money. And then he said, "Okay, let's see what you do." And when he came back, he said, "Did you use your money?" And so one guy had increased it by 10, another by 5, and the only one that was the sluggard there was the one that buried his. So that's what he looks at. Did you use what I gave you? So if you just sit in your house and watch TV all day and don't interact with anybody and don't have any connections with anybody, then you want to say, wait a minute. I've got some abilities. I got some things that I can give to the people around me. I think many of us who are going through the grieving process are involved in that struggle of, okay, now where do I direct my talents? So I had my talents directed toward this loved one, but now that person is gone. So who else is out there? Where else can I turn my attention? And that takes some time to go through that kind of reorienting of yourself. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that issue of living your life to its fullest, carrying out your potential? Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
So this weekend, we were able to go to a presentation by Jen Vergara. Her daughter Ruby was killed in a school shooting in Madison a couple of years ago. And so that's something that she's doing now. She's trying to encourage and help other people, really focusing on the Word of God in terms of how to respond to situations like that. So she's now turned that into something that's still living her life.
Yeah, and that idea of taking such a tragedy and taking such an incredible loss and turning it into, again, now she knows that there are others and that she can be helpful to other parents and other siblings and parents who are experiencing that kind of a situation. And that's a beautiful thing. And you see many examples of that, of people who have done that. So I think we tend to look at those experiences as all negative. And what she has been able to do is to say, I also learned something from that. So that's where she came out of it with something useful that she could apply to other situations. Yeah. Was there another hand? Yeah.
Do you have any words or advice on how to handle someone who's always like dwelled on death? Like they do just sit and watch TV, they don't reach out and do anything unless someone calls them. As they get older, they just, it's, well, I don't have anything to live for. What do you say to them?
Yeah.
Or how do you help them see that there's more? And they are, they do believe, but they just, they're very negative mindset, very.
Yeah, and I think too, when you have someone who's kind of gone into their cave and they don't want to come out, and everything that you suggest, they shoot it down, and then it becomes a contest, because you're like, all right, I got a really good idea. This'll get her going, and see, bam, that's gone. So I think you get to that point where you don't want to get into that contest. You don't want to fight with them. But you don't want to stop coming. So I think that is the main thing. And I've had a couple experiences that way too, where I really thought the person was stuck and would never get unstuck, but I kept coming. And then something happened that I didn't do, that I had no control over, that I never saw coming. And then all of a sudden they were kind of like, hey, I just got the idea that maybe I could start doing this. But just hang in there. That's really my encouragement to you. And that is a very, very difficult thing, because you are constantly dealing with that negativity, and it sucks you dry as well. So I also want to say, take care of yourself. And so if there are days where you don't have the energy to enter into that situation, take a day off and give yourself that grace as well. But I think those are amongst the most difficult, when people are so entrenched in their cave. And I think sometimes what's happened to me too, I'll meet that person in the hospital, and this might be years later, and we're just having a conversation, and they are talking about what's happened to them. And then that becomes the moment where they start to, again, start to come out of that cave. So you and I may not be the ones that ultimately bring them out. It might be somebody else, but hang in there, yeah.
I feel like as part of that conversation, we have only talked about one side of things, like what to do for the dying ones. I feel like we also need to hear how not to be a nuisance when you're dying, because like we'll all die. I mean, like we're here because we're all headed that way. So for example, I mean, some of this sounds very demanding and like I've told John, when it gets to the end and like I'm okay dying in the hospital, like I don't care, like you're talking about watching the birds and the bees and whatever. I'm like, no, I'm gonna watch them today. And like I also don't want to feel like a burden and a nuisance to my family at the end. Okay? Like I know where I'm going. I can't wait to get there. Like, I'm not that insecure. Like, let's go, So I just don't know. I mean, like, it's like, how much more can I put on my family kind of thing? And it's like, no, just let's go and get a dumpster and.
All right. That gives a new meaning to dumpster diving, doesn't it? But, yeah. Hey, here's Teddy. Oh, and that burden thing is a huge issue. So many people, they hate it that they are coming to the end of life, and the medical expenses, and again, what it's going to do to their families. They're not going to be there to do what they normally did. So that burden thing. And I just think that we need to also hear that and say, I understand that. There is that burden part, but there also is that other part. I love you, and you have been such an important part of my life, and I could not imagine leaving you alone at this point. So get over the fact that you're feeling like a burden, because I'm not leaving. I'm sticking by you. So there is that back and forth kind of thing. We're kind of negotiating in a way.
With the stubbornness to it's, you and I have talked, that I've been going through that with my dad, ever since Mom died, trying to get him out of it. And there are some days I'm just really, really persistent. Like, he had to go to the doctor for his feet, and he knew he had to, and he's like, no, I'm not going. I don't want, Dad's never cared for doctors. And he doesn't want to leave the apartment. I said, okay, I know you can be stubborn. Okay, I'm going to be stubborn too. I'm just going to sit here and, watch. I said, go get, he says, well, I should take a shower. I haven't taken one for, I said, fine, go take the shower. I'm not leaving. Go take,
So good work, Matt, Yeah.
I'm not,
That was a time where you stared Dad down, and you won that one. Yeah. Sue. Yeah.
When it comes to being a burden, having conversations with the people that are around you. What do you want towards the end of your life? What's gonna help you? What's gonna help me? There's people that just avoid it until the time that it comes. And I find that the families that have had these conversations, no, Mom does not want to die at home. Mom wants to die in the hospital, or, where, we're not taking care of her, or the opposite. But, having those conversations before they actually come up is very helpful and comforting towards people.
And again, it's kind of a dance, isn't it? We are trying to get in step with each other and to be helpful. And there's going to be some moments where my mom and her sister kind of got into a kerfluffle because her sister was too attentive. She was hovering, and that my mother was like, no, I need some space. And so, again, they had to negotiate that. So my aunt went home in a huff and then came back the next day, and they made up, and it was okay. But they just had to figure out what's helpful and what isn't. Yeah.
In relation to being prepared, you had mentioned knowing bank accounts and that type of thing, to get those things in alignment. With where we are right now with securities, one thing that I've run across is that knowing a username and a password isn't always enough, because now there's two-factor authentication, and there's this code that you need to be able to actually access it, even though you have those. So it's just a reminder for people that if you've got a security email that's gonna get the code, if you don't know that username and password as well, you're gonna run into a very, very hard brick wall. And it's just a reminder to kind of revisit some of those things. When you think you have it set, it might not be right in today's age.
Well, again, the legalities, there's lots of stuff to check out there. What is all involved there? Yeah, thank you.
Kind of with what Lori was saying, was something that I didn't even think was important, but my mom put me as a co-owner to her checking account. And after she passed away, to be able to write checks also out of her account was helpful, because I didn't know all of that stuff. But because I had that ability, and even when we were like selling her car or things like that, those were just, I was very thankful she did that. And in that like I referenced that book that I didn't really like, I guess maybe it was okay. It said to talk about, you had said this too, talk with your family when you're healthy. And I think the parents are the ones that have to have the conversation and start it, even if it's awkward. And they used the instance of Christmas, they had all their kids together, and they talked about it, and they kind of joked. And they're like, why are you talking about this, Dad? But then they did it, and the kids were very thankful that the parents said, this is what Mom and I want done. Like, we have these things set up, this is where you find it, and yeah, it was that's a good thing to think about.
Have the courage to have the conversations, and we all know we should, But again, there are all kinds of factors that make us shun away from that. So take the courage to talk to your kids so everybody knows what's going on. We are out of time. So the last word is just, the final surrender. And really, everything that we do in life leads to that moment. So if we can take care of all of those preceding things, then we're ready. We're really ready to surrender, and that can be a really beautiful thing. My favorite image was where the ship is leaving the harbor, and everybody is sad. And they, oh, there she goes. But on the other side of the world, there's another harbor, and they're saying, here she comes. And so I think keep that image in your mind, that ship, as I have on the cover, is pretty beat up. The sails are tattered, but we're coming to that next harbor. Thank you all for your attendance.